right, Granger, what's up, man? Welcome to Dad Edge, my friend.
What's up? Yeah, it's good to be on. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, but the first thing, it's really like the studio. Like this is definitely different. So tell us about this studio you got going on here. Was this you, or did your wife have a touch on this one?
No, I will not. I give her credit for a lot of things. I will not do it for this. But I'm actually this is a small space, and this is where I do my radio show,
Okay,
and
yeah.
it sounds best in here. So if I'm want to do your show, I want to make it sound a little bit better. So I'm in
Well,
here.
sounds good. It looks good, man.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Well, before we get into the meat and the potatoes, why don't we start out with some fun questions? How's that sound?
Sure, sure.
Cool. All right. So, favorite sport growing up was what?
Football.
Football. Okay, what position?
Uh, Growing up, I was running back and some kind of safety or DB cornerback. As I got older, it was all DB cornerback
Awesome, man. And how long did you play for?
through high school.
All through high school. That's
Yep,
cool.
yep.
You want to hear kind of a funny story? You'll appreciate this. And how many years total did you play?
I started in sixth grade, which I
Okay.
think is a good age for tackle ball. Either sixth or seventh. That's a whole different podcast in itself, just discussing that.
Yeah.
So sixth through senior year high school.
All right. Very cool, man. So I'll humiliate myself here, and you might get a laugh out of this. So I grew up playing baseball, and I did wrestling, and so I coached. I have four boys, and my two older ones are 17 and 15. And I coached their baseball teams, coached wrestling, and then my 15-year-old in the third grade, he was like, "I want to do football." I'm like, "Awesome!" And I really took that. I was like, "Man, I won't have to coach," which I love to coach, but I was like, "I want to be a spectator again. I just want to sit back and just enjoy, you know." And so I bring my son to the very first football practice, and this coach comes walking up to me. He's like, "Hey, man," he's like, I need some help. I need some help this year. And I'm telling you, when I say I know nothing about football, I mean like I watched the Super Bowl and that's about
Okay,
it. Like
okay,
I,
I
I
got you.
know if you've seen the movie Coming to America, it's like, he kicked the pigskin through the big H. It was the most ripping victory. That's about my understanding of, I mean, I kind of knew the basics, but so I was just like, dude, no, like you don't want me helping you. I knew nothing about this game. And he just laughed. I think he thought I was joking. He's like, no, man, clearly like, yeah, you played. I was like, no, I've never played the game. He's like, well, you watch it. I was like, not really. I was like, I like it. Don't get me wrong. But like, I've never really had time to like sit down and watch it. So like, I was like, I'll do it. I was like, I'll hold a pad or whatever you want to do. So, first practice, and he's like, all right, he's like, blah, blah. He's like, all right, Coach Hagner, I need you to go run, these guys over here to do a jet sweep. And I'm like, what is that? And he's like, you really don't know anything. Like, I was like, I wasn't kidding. I know nothing. So like, I became the joke of the entire third grade team and all the coaches. Like, they're like, all right, we're going to teach you guys this play. And Coach Hagner, we're going to teach you this play too. So, but yeah, I knew
That's a
nothing
good
at
way to
all.
learn.
It
Coaching
was.
is a good way to learn. Yeah.
It was for sure. All right, cool. So football. Uh, what was one of your favorite childhood memories growing up?
Um. Oh gosh. Give me an age range. We'll start with that.
How about teenage years?
Yeah, teenage years. It's funny. Because that's a good segue because so much of my teenage years were football. Growing up in Texas, we actually lived across the street from the high school. So I heard the bands and the crowds and saw the lights on Friday nights as long as I could remember, especially living in that house. We moved there when I was 4. So I remember Friday nights and then growing up and then kind of fulfilling that dream myself and then being the guy out there under those lights with the band. But man, as a teenager, going to high school playoffs, playing in Texas Stadium, um, it, there's a lot of things I don't remember at all about being a teenager, but I remember those moments vividly.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, it's I mean, it sounds like, I mean, football was definitely a big part of your life growing up, and probably obviously some of your most fondest memories. What about favorite movie and why?
I would go with Braveheart.
Okay.
Be my favorite movie. Um, I love it. That was actually I was probably a teenager or a late teenager
Yeah.
when I first saw Braveheart, and it impacted me. It changed my life, and I am trying. My son Lincoln, my oldest son, is 9. I'm trying to get him to watch it, and he watched a little bit with me, and then right there at the beginning, there's this scene where all these men are hanging by nooses in this shed, and he's like, "Nope, nope, Daddy, I'm
No,
out.
I'm done.
I can't." And I'm like, "Oh, come on, man, we got to watch a little." But I'm so ready to get him to see those kind of movies that really shaped me in so many different ways.
Yeah, that's definitely a classic. I think my kids, my older ones, my two younger ones, so I have a 9-year-old as well, and I have a 7-year-old as well, and they haven't watched Braveheart yet, but I think it was probably like right around 11 or 12 when my two older guys watched it, and they loved it. Like, and that is definitely a classic movie. My older ones, like most recently, we watched Shawshank.
I
And
mean, that's like 1 and 2 for me. Braveheart
yeah,
and Shawshank. Yeah,
yeah,
it's one and two, and sometimes that will switch. Yeah.
cool. One more question for you. So, what is something you appreciate about your wife most of all?
My wife is completely, well, not completely, but she's as much of a selfless person as that I could ever ask for. I mean, she does not put herself first in hardly any situation, almost to a fault. And but as a mother and as a wife, we are just continually grateful at how she puts herself second in everything that she does. And like I said, sometimes that's not good because it's like, hey, babe, you got to take care of yourself. You got to look after yourself in this way, or you got to sleep a little bit more. But man, it's an amazing trait that she has.
I definitely understand. It's almost like the blessing and the curse, right? My wife Jess is the same way. She's
Hmm.
we always call her she's the awesome mom of 4 boys, and she'll run herself into the ground, for these kids and
Yep.
for us, and we always have to tell her to like pump the brakes and hey, go recharge, go do something for yourself because we can see when she starts to get tired. But yeah, man, that is a true
Mm.
blessing, to have a woman like that in your life.
Yeah,
Um,
it is.
and remind me, wait, how did you guys meet? How long ago was it?
We met 15 years ago. It was my very first music video shoot, and she was the love interest in the video, as cliche as it sounds. Yeah,
So
so
how did you
we
know when you're like, wait a second, was it when she first showed up on set where you're like, oh, or what? How did that roll
well,
out?
yeah, it definitely was that. But it was also, I kind of had to tether that with the idea of this might be just a Hollywood made up feeling. This might not
Yeah.
be real. This is what this set's doing to us. And so I didn't say anything because she had a boyfriend. And then a couple days went by after the shoot, and she texted me and said, "Hey, I just want to let you know. I just want to hear from you if you feel anything more than just friends from that video because I do." And I said, regardless of what I say, this means you need to break up with your boyfriend.
How did she respond to that?
She was like, "Yeah, you're right." Because you
Oh
can't be
my
having a
gosh.
boyfriend and then texting guys, and
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
just clearly that's not working out, regardless of how you feel for me. So she did, and I said it took all the restraint in my body to say do that and then come back and then let's go grab coffee. And so she did. It took like 3 weeks before she said, "Hey, I'm completely single," and I said, "Okay, let's go get some coffee."
And did you know like right away? Did you so you going back to that feeling of like, oh, this is like kind of like the Hollywood scene, and we're was that chemistry real, or was it just something that was
Hmm.
something that was situational? Like, how did you know that it was probably something that was going to be more permanent?
Well, I don't believe in soulmates. I don't believe there's the one, the capital O, the one person for everybody. I don't. As unromantic as that sounds, that's not going to sell any romantic novels at all or movie scripts. But Amber, I loved her quickly. I was very attracted to her. She checked all the boxes that I wanted in a woman and as a wife and as a future mother. And as unromantic as it sounds, I was just like, man, I want to marry this woman. I'm going to do it. I made a decision, a constant conscious decision out of my brain to say, I'm going to do this. And then I knew that when I do this, I'm going to stick with it. And so I bought a ring about 4 months after that coffee that we had.
Wow, you didn't waste any time.
No, then we got married 7 months after that.
No way. So you guys not even a year?
Yeah, we got married. I think it was the year anniversary of when we first met. Yeah.
Wow.
So we dated just less than a year.
That's amazing. Just kind of, I want to build on this just a little bit. I mean, a lot of people would say, that's still like the honeymoon phase, right? It's like that first few months, that first year.
Sure.
And then, and some couples, quite frankly, they just don't work out. I mean, looking back on the past 15 years, what would you say have been some of the reasons or the foundational things that were there that are still there that have kept you guys just, because I'm watching how you talk about her, and I'm listening to your voice tone and the look on your face, and it is insanely obvious you were just still head over heels for this woman.
Yeah, I know people say that stuff. I hear them all the time. What's crazy is that most marriages in the history of humanity were arranged.
Yeah.
If you take the bulk of history, most of them were arranged, and they mostly worked. As far as we know, as far as we're looking back on historical records, most marriages worked. But until now marriages don't work. It's like a 50-50 shot, right? Something like that. That would be the odds. And yet now we are choosing. We get to choose from everyone who we want. You would think that would mean we would have it narrowed down and we make a calculated decision, but that's actually hurting us. And so to answer your question directly, it's we trust each other, we listen to each other, but more important than all that, we're just committed to each other. Like when you're saying your vows and you say through sickness and in health, for better or worse, we don't mean that, do we? In a normal marriage, we don't really mean that, for better or worse. No, we mean for better or whatever really is helping me gain something. But as soon as that stops, as soon as I stop gaining something out of this, then you know what? We should separate. I don't know if this is working out. There's probably somebody better. I think I made a wrong decision. The soulmate out there that I picked was not the soulmate. There's another one. There has to be, because I'm not happy. And that is the prevalent idea of society today. And we've really lost the idea of, no, love is a decision. We make a commitment. Of course you need to be attracted. Of course your heart needs to be fluttering when you're with her. Of course you need to make some good decisions based on, do we have enough in common that this is going to work? But not too much in common where it's still exciting and she has her things and I have mine. And we check a few boxes. I don't think that should take more than 5-6 months. Really? Mm-hmm. We have these long, and then you get engaged, and then we have long engagements. People are like, yeah, I'm getting married in 2027. Well, what good is that going to do? What makes it different when you actually do get married from right now? Nothing. And so, I think there's a lot of factors, but I think it comes down to just saying, you know what, we're going to commit to this. We're going to make a decision. We're going to make this covenant together, and we're not going to break it, for better or for worse.
Yeah, man, I love that, dude. And to be honest, like, I'm starting to scratch my head because I knew my wife for 7 years before we got married. But
how old were you? How old were you?
So I was 21 when I met her, and I was 28 when we got married. And right there, I'll just tell you, I was 28-ish when I met Amber. So I can't compare to you because you made the decision at the same time I did. So we still are on the same level. Yeah, I couldn't have been 21. Yeah, I was pretty stupid at 21. So anyway, same.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're good. You're good. Because I think about that a lot, But with me, I mean, I had all kinds of like relationship issues and baggage and all kinds of things I kind of had to work through, which is part of the reason why I'm doing this show now. So, and I know what we're gonna get to. You and Amber had this pretty defining moment of what it meant to be for better or worse, and it all happened in that garden at the hospital you were at. But I want to back up from that because I know that's something that was really meaningful for you guys. But in June of 2019, a parent's worst nightmare happened to you, and it happened, in the backyard where the pool is. But I would love for you to just, share that story. And I know that this is it's definitely not an easy story to share. But I would love for you to share what happened on that night.
Yeah, it was June 4th, 2019. And it was the night before I was heading out on just a typical summer tour as a touring musician. Very beautiful night. I remember the sky was blue and the clouds were white, and she has her best dress on early June.
Yeah.
And the kids were young. We had London was 7, Lincoln, my son, was 5, River, our youngest, was 3. And they were all in the yard with me playing. Amber was getting things ready for bedtime in the house. And I was doing gymnastics to this routine that my daughter had made, London. And I was kind of spotting her as she was doing these gymnastics. And the boys were playing water gun fight. And it got quiet. And I remember thinking it was quiet. And I looked around for River. And I saw him over my left shoulder. He was in our pool, face down. And our pool was locked and gated. And so don't know how he got in there. And that was part of the confusion in my head. It was what I was seeing didn't make any sense. That scene didn't make sense. I had just seen him. Had seen him laughing, spraying water guns at me behind a tree. And I don't know if it was a minute, 2 minutes that had gone by before I found him in the middle of the pool, and rushed in. All these thoughts are going through my head, rushed in and picked him up. And I thought he was going to be coughing and crying. And I was going to say, how'd you get into this gate? And that wasn't the case. He was lifeless and cold and purple and like a rag doll. Tried CPR, didn't know. Besides the movies, I didn't really know how to do it. I tried my best to pump his chest and blow into his mouth, kind of afraid to pump too hard on his chest that I might bruise his ribs. And then that horrible thought came into my head of, well, maybe bruising his ribs is not a big deal right now. Maybe that's kind of irrelevant to the situation we're dealing with. Amber came out with my phone. I didn't have it on me. We called 911. We live about 10 minutes. We did when we lived in that house, about 10 minutes from the emergency services. And that was a long time, too long for oxygen not to be in his brain. They came back, recovered his heartbeat quickly with electric shock. And we followed him to the hospital, but the damage was already done to his brain. He had no more brain activity after that. So they came in and told us after about 24 hours that we had lost him.
And I mean, first of all, I can't even imagine, like those things going through your head and probably the longest 10 minutes of your entire life, as you're waiting for the ambulance. There was a moment though, where the medical team came to you, and there was what you guys thought was there was like a glimmer of hope there for a moment. Yeah. But I would love for you to share that as well.
Yeah, they got his heartbeat back, and
Right.
They came to me and they said, we got his heartbeat, but he's still very sick. And I just thought, oh, there it is. We really dodged a bullet. Wow. That was close. What a close call. How are we going to fix this gate issue? What kind of new lock? Those are like the thoughts going in my head. And we followed him to the hospital. And then they transferred him to another hospital, which is the first indication that, things are probably not okay. We went to the second hospital, and he was just perfect. He was just beautiful. All his skin color was back. He was attached to the breathing machine. He was sitting on like a warm blanket, and he just had his eyes closed, just like he was sleeping. And the nurse told me he is very, very sick. But he's doing well. His body's responding to the medications that were given him, and as you can see, his color's back, but he's doing well, but he's still very, very sick. It's going to be a long road ahead of us. So like those words were so comforting, and I was like, oh man, great. And I even thought, okay, I think he might have some brain damage. Like we might not ever know the River we knew, the crazy wild boy. We might never know that boy again, but that's okay. At least we still have him. But that changed.
Yeah, and there was a moment in there where the team came to you and they wanted your permission. They needed your permission to turn the machines off, and you asked for a second opinion, and the response was, absolutely. But at that moment, things I think got really, really real for you guys of what you were up against.
Yeah, the first time it was one doctor, and he told us just very matter of factly. I mean, he was emotional, but he was also just speaking with clarity. There is a 0% chance of survival. We have seen this as many times as we care to see. There's no chance. There's no chance. And I said, we want a second opinion. And they said, okay, well, that absolutely. Brought in a new team. The neurologists come in, this whole new team, and they do all the same studies. Then they come to us as a team. And they say, we are so sorry. We've lost him. The only thing left now is for you to tell us when to turn off the breathing machine and let his little body breathe out on his own, his last few breaths, whatever that might be. And so he said, we need some time. So Amber and I walked around the hospital, just kind of reflecting on the last 30 hours or so. I mean, it's just anyone that's experienced an unexpected death can kind of relate to the idea that, man, just a few hours ago we had him, and he was eating popcorn on the couch, and he had his PJs on, getting ready to go to bed. This has to be a dream. It doesn't feel real. That's the shock. And I think the human brain does a pretty good job of kind of numbing everything so that you don't feel the full impact. It really lets you feel the full impact in intervals going out over the next few months. So we went out to the garden, and that's kind of the point you brought up earlier when Amber and I were just kind of staring into this little serenity garden at the hospital.
Yeah, you guys had this moment that you're going to love each other through this, despite, the statistics of marriages not making it through something like this. But tell us about that moment and that decision.
Yeah, it was as matter of fact, a moment that a couple could have. We recognized as we were just looking out into that garden, the little fountains, we recognized that the statistics are going to say we're going to get divorced after this. And the earlier that we realized it, I thought the better. The earlier we talked about it, the better. Instead of kind of going back into our lives and dealing with funerals and preparations and dealing with the other siblings, a few months could go by and it could really hit us the wrong way. So we talked about it right there at ground zero. Hey, most couples get a divorce, but I want to promise you that that's not going to be us. We're going to decide right here that we will not let this tear us apart. It's going to get bad. Things are going to get really rocky, but we're not going to do it. We're not going to give in and break up. We're going to stay together for this little boy's legacy, for River's legacy, and for his two siblings, and for everyone else in our family around us and friends. We're going to stay together. And she said, we're going to do it. It was like a contract we made right there.
And the fact that she didn't say okay, and the fact that she said, we are.
Yeah.
It was almost like that. It wasn't like I'm agreeing with what you're saying. It's like, no, I'm staking a flag in the ground as well with you.
Yeah.
And, that's something that is absolutely incredible for the strength of you guys to make that decision. I'm curious, what looking back on that moment, where do you guys identify that strength coming from?
Looking back in hindsight,
Uh-huh.
I didn't know. I didn't know then. There was a greater purpose for us. I could see that now in hindsight. I see that with clarity. At the time, it just was a feeling. It was a feeling of the right thing to do. Now, the thing about that moment too, that's worth saying is that the cards were on her table. Like that was her decision to make, because I was the one responsible for River that night. At any moment, she could have said, at any time, she could have said, how could you have done this?
Yeah.
Where were you? How could you dare let this happen to our little boy? She could have said it, and just that comment might have unraveled everything. I might have not been able to take that kind of criticism in such a vulnerable time for me. But she didn't say that. She held that back. Instead, she said the opposite. She said, "This is on both of us. I was in the house. I should have been with you. We're parents together. This is on both of us." And it's like, now we're a team. Now we're going through this valley together instead of alone. And that I think that was all on her.
Wow. I mean, the strength to even say that, right? Because I mean, you think about even the grieving process, and you think about that the part of grieving is anger, right? And some of the times when that anger is so powerful and it's so overwhelming, and you can't really contain that anger, you actually just want to deflect that anger, even if you don't mean it, right? Even if you know at the core of who
Absolutely.
you are, in the bottom of your heart, you don't mean it, but you'll deflect that anger to the other person.
Absolutely.
And she didn't do that. Neither did you, which is remarkable.
Yeah, that you're right. It doesn't have to be sincere. It's just that knee-jerk reaction could be so damaging in itself.
Exactly. Yeah. What was it like? I mean, I know that there's this part of your story where you were in Boise, Idaho, and you call it as we all would. You had a target on your back for some serious spiritual warfare. And there was a moment that, you were able to fight, and to fight well. But I'm curious of, in between that time, what was it like for you to in some way, somehow, I don't know how to do it, but I have to get back to doing what I was doing and making a living and touring again and making music. But how did you rebound from that?
At the beginning, after the tragedy, between that and the dark night in Boise, it was really one, and I'd say this to anyone that's kind of at ground zero of a big tragedy. It's you try to think of it in small intervals, try to aim lower and shoot at something that's attainable. So you think, all I got to do is get it through this week. But then you realize, no, I can't. I don't think I can do it. I can't do this week. So all I have to do is get to Wednesday. No, it's too much. Just get through today. If I could just get through today, too much. Okay? If I can make it through this hour, no, a minute. If I could do, here, I'm going to watch my watch here. If I got 60 seconds in me, then I'll be okay. And then it goes all the way down. Really, for me, it got all the way down to, I'm just going to go one heartbeat at a time. As crazy as that might sound on this side of sanity, when you're losing your mind, it's like if I can go one more heartbeat, then that's one heartbeat closer to some kind of healing. I don't know exactly when that healing's coming or where it comes from. That's what I was thinking at the time. But I know that I would get closer to it if I could just survive one more heartbeat. And through that mentality, it was like, okay, through this heartbeat, I'm going to brush my teeth. I'm going to put a hat on. I'm going to make my bed. These are like slow progressions. Okay, it's been 3 weeks. I think I'm ready to go out and work again. I'll take the family with me. And so it's little moments kind of building up a story and just getting some progress made. Now that ultimately, that didn't heal me. That ended up culminating into a really bad night in Boise, Idaho. But that's what got me to there. That's at least what kept me alive for 6 months.
Yeah, and it was this night in Boise, Idaho, that you guys were on tour, and this was a dark moment. But it was looking back on it, when I heard you share this story, this was a defining moment. At the same time, it was such a dark moment, but it was such a defining moment of what I would say is now turned into what you've created.
They probably always are, aren't they?
Yeah, that's insanely true. Yeah, so if you wouldn't mind sharing that story, I would love for you to.
I don't know if I've ever really thought of it that way, but I mean, if you look at the defining moment of an athlete, it's not winning the Super Bowl.
Right.
It's that game they lost in week 5 when all the odds were against them, and they went to the locker room and said, "Are we giving up? Or are we going to make this? We're going to make this work." That ended up being the Super Bowl for them, and those defining moments are always the darkest days. I had built up through so much self-help in myself. I had learned how to cope for 6 months. I had learned how to optimize my sleep, get up early, read as much nonfiction as I could, get to the gym. I was eating healthy. I was counting calories. I was trying to just optimize everything around me, control what I could control so that the mental gymnastics I was doing were more manageable. And it was actually working. I was getting a little bit better. And I remember I was dealing with, for those 6 months, what I call the slideshow. It was this PTSD memory of River in the pool and the hospital and the funeral, and it's all on me. It's my fault, and I couldn't get those images out of my head. Went through therapy, went through all this stuff to try to suppress it, and did a pretty good job, culminating into Boise, Idaho. We had a pretty good show. It was a really good concert for us, and we had a couple of distractions happening at the show that night where we overcame those distractions, had a great show, and afterward the band said, "Man, this feels normal again." And I was like, "Yes, it does. It finally feels like we've turned the corner. We see the light at the end of the tunnel. This has been a horrible year, 2019, with everything we've dealt with. Not only me, but my family. And then not only my family, but my band and crew. And everyone just walked through such a dark time, and it was feeling normal again. Let's go have a few drinks. We haven't had some boys sitting down having some whiskey. We have not had that kind of night in so long. Let's go do it." And I was like, absolutely. Absolutely. That's what we need, just to feel normal. So we did. We sat down in this little hole in the wall bar, had a few drinks, laughed, told stories, reminisced. And as I was getting up, I remember my sound guy said, "Hey man, it's really good to see you like this again."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Thanks, man. Thank you. I feel that." But then I walked outside and realized I had too much to drink. I was a little tipsy. Walked onto the bus and recognized, as the snowball started down the hill, oh, this is the first time I've been inebriated, out of control, since we lost River, and I had tried to build up all of this strength on my own. This is the first time that I might not be able to control it with all my little mechanisms. And that snowball got bigger and bigger. I started losing my mind. The slideshow hit me. It was more vivid than it ever had been. I uncontrollably bawled right there in the back, just weeping in the back of the bus. My heart hurt so much I felt like it was going to stop. I felt like I was going to have a heart attack. So I did the one thing a drowning man does, is he'll do anything to find the air. And I knew where the air was. It was in a drawer in a 9mm pistol, a Glock pistol in my little drawer in the back lounge of my bus. And I pulled it out and I put it up to my head, and I thought, okay, I knew exactly where the pressure point was on that trigger. The Glock has a double trigger on it, and I knew there was one in the chamber. I knew how far to pull it, and I kind of got right to that moment and just held it there. And it was then, through that turmoil, that I recognized that I was having thoughts, I was thinking about things that were not my own conscious. And this is when it gets hard to explain, because I don't want to over spiritualize this. I don't want to make it sound like some kind of fantasy. So the best way I think about it when I'm in that moment is, we have our normal thoughts that we recognize, but there was another set of thoughts that were manifesting in my brain saying, "This is the way. Squeeze, and everything will feel good. This is the way to end it all." And then I recognized those thoughts are not my thoughts. I am not alone in this bus. I am in a spiritual warfare. And it's like all at once, the veil was removed, and I recognized the battle I was in. And I also recognized that the weapons I had were worthless against this kind of enemy. And nothing I could do on my own could could fight this enemy that had me cornered and surrounded and outnumbered and outmanned and out. I mean, I was at the brink of death. It was in that moment that I just said, I cried out. I'm not really sure how, but I just cried out, Jesus, save me. Please, Lord, Jesus, save me. It's like I appealed to the one cause that I knew would be greater. But I didn't really know that, but it did. And everything went away. The slideshow disappeared. I dropped the gun. I felt a calmness come over me. I fell to the floor in all my clothes. Fell asleep on that bus floor and woke up the next morning with a new thought and a new mission. It was, who is this Jesus and why did it stop the slideshow? Of course, I knew of him. I knew the story of him. I'd called myself a Christian my whole life, but this was real. I was in a real war now, and this wasn't a fairy tale. This wasn't Sunday school anymore. This was a real war, and he had healed me. So then I went on a new journey. It was not a journey to fix myself anymore. It was a journey to learn who he is, a journey that really I'm still on today.
Man, I'm putting myself in your position, and the worst pain that any father could possibly endure, right? And that spiritual warfare. And I heard you say a quote, which is, surrender is power under control.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I've never, ever heard that before. Surrender is power under control. And, even how I started like just this podcast, which is in no means even in the same vicinity of what you're talking about. But I remember a surrender, and I talk about it often, to where I was in my office and I was a mess, and I had, I just had a really dark moment. And I remember that surrender and what it felt like. But the interesting thing about the surrender under control is that for most of us who haven't crossed that line from like, okay, I got nothing left. Whatever it is that you want me to do, I'm here. But it's right before you get to that, it feels like you're on the edge of this cliff. And everything about being a man and our mentality and how we identify and the things that we value, like it tells us not to do that. In fact, there's those voices in our head, and I would say they're probably more earthly voices, right? The things that we read about that says, don't do that, because if you do that, then you're weak. You're less than. But as soon as you surrender, there's something really interesting that happens. It's a very vulnerable, authentic moment, and there's a part of it it's terrifying, right? But there's also a part of it, it's just like it's like oxygen in your lungs at the same time. But tell me about what that moment was for you, and you think about that quote, surrender under control.
Yeah, that is a surrender to us. Many times, especially as Americans, pulls up this idea of weakness.
Right.
Well, really what that surrender, you're saying power under control, really the definition we're drawing from is meekness. It's that ancient word of meekness, right? And that word is so many times associated with weakness, and it's absolutely not. In fact, the original meaning of that word goes way back to where they would go find horses for battle. And the warrior men would go up onto the highest mountains, and they would look for horses for battle. But they would go past all the smaller horses and all the normal horses in the valley, and they want to go up and find those wild Mustangs, the crazy ones, the ones with the most power. Because if they can tame that horse, that wild Mustang, the one with all the power, if they could tame that horse then would trust its master into the fiercest battle. That horse would run straight into the battle line of the enemy without ever pulling up until the master says, pull up. Those were considered the meek horses. Complete power under control. That kind of surrender. It's not weakness. It's saying, I'm not the highest power here. God is, and I'm gonna be his servant, and I'll go full strength into the enemy line until he tells me to stop. Because he has the power under control. That's the meekness. That's the surrender that I had to learn. I thought I could fight that battle on my own. That was weakness.
I think that yeah, it's such a confusing thing to most men because it's our ego that really gets in the way of this. And I think a lot of men view ego as like, well, I'm just awesome, right?
Hmm.
But the ego is actually much more than that. The ego will actually keep us from surrendering, right? And it'll keep us from that strength of that surrender. You know, you once you surrendered, and once you're like, okay, I'm gonna go on this journey to really understand who Jesus is and maybe develop a relationship with him. What were some of the first things you did?
Well, I just, as practically as I could, thinking, who is this Jesus? That the first practical thought that came to my mind was, well, I need to listen to a preacher. And then the first preacher that came to my mind was Billy Graham. I didn't really know any others. Billy Graham, that sounds like a good place to start. So then I realized on YouTube, there's just hundreds of Billy Graham sermons. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna see if he could tell me who this Jesus is. So I'm listening to Billy Graham, just riding around in my truck, going to work, doing things, and listening to these sermons. And people thought I was crazy. It's like, what are you doing, man? It's like, no, there's something to this. This is feeding me in some way. I'm not sure how. And it wasn't until later. It wasn't until really it culminated on into one day. It was March 1st, 2020, when I realized that all at once that finding Jesus is revealed in his word, and his word is the Bible. And that is such an easy statement for me to make, but it's crazy in hindsight how confusing that would have been to me. I was like, well, the Bible is not really meant to read, right? That's just kind of like a collection of wise teachings and moral laws that we could live by to have a better life. That's really what it's like. No, no, the Bible is the story of God redeeming his people. It is the story containing the gospel, which is that we are sinners, that we are guilty. And I struggled with that feeling of guilt from the backyard with River. The Bible says we're guilty. The gospel says we're guilty. We're sinners, but I have come to clean you. I've come to redeem you. I've come to take away your guilt. And Jesus did that on the cross. So he comes in, he goes to the cross, he becomes the ultimate sacrifice for sinners, reconciling those to himself and saying, those who believe in me will be clean. They'll be restored. They'll be ransomed. That was a story that I kind of knew intellectually, but I felt it through reading the Bible itself. So I went home upon this realization. I told Amber, I said, hey, we're going to read the Bible. No more devotionals, no more listening to stuff on YouTube. We're going to start in Matthew 1 and just start reading like our life depends on it, like it's an actual book, like it is. And she was like, I'm in. So we started reading it. And as I started feeling this restoration through the living, breathing word, then I learned who he is. That's when I finally found true healing through all of this.
And you're just, gosh, you're 3 years really into this, right?
Yeah.
It's fascinating. You and I started, I would say, our faith walk right around the same time. And the same thing. I mean, I grew up, going to church, but I did not. In fact, I was really overwhelmed by the Bible. And
Yeah,
in
of
fact, I was
course.
just like, yeah. And the interesting thing is, I was so overwhelmed by it that I'm like, well, I don't get this. I don't even know. I don't even understand how it's even applicable to today. And when
Same.
you really peel back the onion layers and you really start to understand it, you're like, this is insanely applicable. So much so that all the how-to guides and all the things that you out there searching for, they're actually right there. And I started mine. It was just at the end of, my gosh, it might have been actually the exact same time you went through it. I had a mentor reach out to me and offer to take me through a mentorship called Operation Timothy, which is you have a Paul and then I'm a Timothy, and then it's a 2 year, like literally deep dive into everything, and someone's guiding you through it. And it was amazing. And I what I can tell you is that, well, one thing I want to ask you about is I have a perception of like this whole guilt and shame thing, right? Where
Yeah.
many of us feel this guilt and shame thing. I honestly believe that is that again is spiritual warfare to keep us away from God.
Sure.
Like I look at it now, like I used to be like, well, why should I even bother? I'm a sinner. And like I sin all the time. Like, what am I going to do? Just go ask for forgiveness every single time? That seems ridiculous, right? But I swear that that's the enemy saying that.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
That's what he wants you to think, right? Versus like, and if you almost look at it as your own kids, right? You're going to forgive your kid every single time they do something wrong. It's not even a question, right?
Yeah.
And that's a love that we can understand. And he loves us obviously way more than that. But I would love for you to share any insight that you have around just men who are walking the earth right now. Maybe they're listening to this podcast. Maybe they're just consumed with some sort of shame, some guilt, some pain, maybe self-blame, right? And they're just like, no, that's not for me. I'm not worthy. What would you say to a man like that?
First of all, I would say you're right. You're not worthy, and neither am I. And that's really the beauty of the gospel, is that when we start to think that we are worthy because of our own worth and what we have done, what we have built, or because of how good we are with rejecting sin, like you said, that has been the antithesis to Christianity since the very beginning. It's always been, the message of Christianity has always been, you're not good enough. You're not worthy on your own. You're worthy in me because I created you for a purpose. And you find worth in my identity as my son, as my adopted child. And yes, you've messed up. I will clean you. And the difference between a redeemed man and an unredeemed man is that the redeemed man, or you could also call it reborn, as I was on March 1st and you were in 2020, the difference after that is you start to hate that sin. The sin that you actually kind of loved, all of us did. You still do it. You still make mistakes. You're still not perfect by any means. I am by no means a perfect man. I still make so many mistakes. But the difference between me now and then is now I go, I hate this. I hate that I messed up. I want to do better, not because I'm earning his love. I'm not earning his respect, but out of gratitude that he saved me from my shame and my guilt and my depravity. He saved me from that. All I want to do, God, I want to keep your word. I want to try to please you, not because it gets me anything, but because the overflow of gratitude that I have, I start to hate my old sin. And I still do it. I say something and I go, oh man, why did I say that joke? I'm sorry, God. I want to get better. Let me be better tomorrow. I failed again today. Let me be better tomorrow. Once again, I got to say it for the third time, not so that I'm earning his love, not that I'm earning his respect. God doesn't need anything from me, but out of gratitude, he saved me. And I want to keep his word in response to that.
And speaking of his word, I mean, that is something I see you doing now all the time. You know, if you look at things that you're doing, you're now speaking, right? You're speaking in churches and you're giving your testimonial and you're sharing the word. Did you ever think, let's just call it 15 years ago, did you ever think that this is what you'd be doing?
Absolutely not. Absolutely. There is no way. Let me just say it let me say that in context, there's no way in hell. I'll use that the most appropriate way I can. There is no way in hell.
Yeah.
5 years ago, 6 years ago, even, you would have said, hey, Granger, you're going to be a preacher in like 5 years? I'd be like, what are you talking about?
What are you talking about?
I'm a country touring
I'm
country
a singer.
musician. Yeah. This is what I'll always do.
Yeah.
And I am a walking testimony that God takes a man like that, the wild Mustang on top of the hill, and tames him and says, you are mine. I call you by name. Now you're going to do all this stuff that you were doing for yourself. Now you're going to do it for me and my kingdom. Oh, and the byproduct of that, you're going to have joy and peace and rest. You're going to wake up in the morning and go, God, you gave me another day to serve you. The wild Mustang under control. You gave me another day. How could I do it, God? Let's do it. Let's do it together. I want to serve you. And I love it, man. I love this new path. I love what he has given me. And it's a new world for me.
So cool, man. That the wild Mustang under control. I love it. You know, I want to make sure that the guys can find you and everything that you're doing. I know you have your book out. But what does the next 12 months look like for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. What I've been saying is I'm in a season of equipping. I'm learning as much as I can. So I'm in seminary. Um, I am, which is a lot, and learning all day long with my local pastor, serving my family and I serving our local church. I haven't been able to really be consistently involved in a local church, which I think is so important, for 2 decades because of country music. I was always out on a Saturday night and then traveling home on a Sunday. I haven't been able to sit with my kids and my wife and listen to a Sunday morning service and consistently in a long, long time. So that is the season I'm in, learning. I am getting out and speaking and going to men's groups and going to conferences, occasionally even preaching on Sunday mornings. But mainly, as much as I'm pouring out, like on this podcast, I want to be poured into doubly so that I'm not just speaking an opinion that I have or random thoughts on my heart. I want to be speaking truth as much as I can, and to do that, I need to be poured into.
Man, that's awesome. Good for you. I'm so happy for you, man. I mean, like just such a story of redemption. Kind of interesting, you and I, we have this at least the timestamp, in common when we started this journey. And I wrote a book. It was supposed to be launched last year, September. The publisher I went through, you'll appreciate this, went bankrupt. Kind of really
Wow.
crazy thing. Yeah, the book is completely done, edited, cover design, everything, totally done. And when I found that out 6 weeks before my book launch, I contacted the CEO. I'm like, hey man, I heard wind, and he's like, yeah, it's true. And he's like, what do you want to do? I can help you self-publish, or I can sign the rights to your book back. And everything, I prayed on it, and everything was like, okay, well, I guess I'll just take the rights back. Hired an agent, and the agent started going shopping for publishers so we could publish this book. And there was a part of me that was the human side of me is like being very impatient, right? I'm like, who's going to come on? Like, let's go. Right.
Yeah.
But something also told me like, hey, just be patient. There's something bigger at play here. I don't know what it was, but I was just like, all right, I'll listen to it. Right. So the publisher was like, hey, we really like this book, but before we publish this one, we want you to write another one. I'm like, okay, what do you want me to write? And we're like, well, we just published a book called The Spirit of, I think it was called The Beauty of Motherhood, right? Which is more like this Christian-based view on motherhood. Like we've been looking for somebody to write a book called The Spirit of Fatherhood. And I'm like, Christian-based view on fatherhood? And they're like, yeah. I was like, me? like me?
Yeah, don't you want a
like,
pastor or something?
I know, right? I was like, don't you want somebody with like credentials? And they're like, well, we've been listening to your podcast. We know your platform. We know that you're newer to the walk. And that's why they said, quite frankly, that's why we want you to write it, because it's more of a student approach to this and your experience versus like preachy, and you're speaking down to somebody. You can you can relate to somebody, and it's more real. And I'm like, that I can get behind, because like I started thinking like, oh my gosh, if you want me to like, I'm not the expert yet, or I don't know if I ever will be, but I'm learning. But that has now turned into this book deal, and we inked a book deal, and they're like, can you have it done in 9 weeks? And I'm like, I literally like looked at them, and like every single part of me, man, every part of me wants to be like, no. But I said yes. And I was like, I can't believe I just said yes. And here's the weird thing. Every time I sit down and write, the craziest things happen. It's the easiest writing I've ever done. Like I'm 7 weeks into it. I've cranked out 40,000 words. I don't even know how that was humanly possible. And I've done it in such short windows of time, and it'll be done. Like by the time that it has to be a minimum of 50,000 words and 12 chapters. And I'm like, I think we're going to go over that actually. But it's been crazy how that's happened, But here's the interesting thing. Ever since I inked that book deal, like there's a target on my back now. And we've had and it's nothing big. Like no one's losing a life, and it's not getting crazy, but it's enough of a distraction to where it'll be like, hey, pull your attention here, there, and pull your attention there, and pull your attention there. And then there's something in me. There was one incident where I'm like, man, like the human part of me wants to just not do this anymore, because I can just see the waves keep coming. And I've decided, I said this to my wife out loud. I was like, even if it cost me everything, it's going to happen. And and there's a part of me that would panic about that before,
Mhm.
but I don't know where that peace comes from, but I feel at peace about it for some crazy reason. But yeah, it's kind of interesting how like your life is unfolding. Mine is, we kind of got started at the same time, but I don't know. I felt it on my heart to share that with you.
Dude,
And
my
yeah,
granddad flew a B-24 in World War II, and when I go back through his journal, his flight diary, it was the enemy fighters and the flak always came when he was close to the target. And it's like that's where you are, man. That's so many times in spiritual warfare. That's how we know we're close to the target. That's how we know we're doing good work for the kingdom. Is when now there's flak, now there's enemy fighters, now there's distractions. That's you right now, man. And that should be a great encouragement.
it is scary,
The
but
more
it is.
comfortable you get, the more you got
Yeah.
to wonder, does this even matter? Because everything's just kind of comfortable right now. And that's not
Yeah.
what I've ever been called to, comfort.
Same thing, man. Gosh, dude, Granger, this has been awesome, man. I want to make sure guys can connect with you if they want to. Your website, social media, your book, the whole 9 yards. Where's the best place for these guys to find you?
Yeah, grangersmith.com is kind of the hub for that. And then all social media, Granger Smith.
Awesome, man. Well, guys, not to worry. We're going to have all the links in the show notes for you.